Today is part one of a four-part live series that I'm going to do titled Stuck, Stalled, Settling. Okay, so this might seem kind of ironic that I'm moving into this topic just after Jane has finished a live event series, that had a lot of focus on busyness. Okay, so how can there be all this busyness yet we be stuck, stalled, or settling, right? So I want you to follow me here, folks. I think you'll be able to see quite clearly what the issue is here. So follow me along. So, there's always going to be a gap between the current reality, okay, and where you want or desire to be. Okay, so there's this gap. So there's the current reality, the current state, the current results you're getting, the current actions you're taking, the current focus, where you're putting your time and energy and focus, that current, mindset or beliefs that you have. So there's this current state. Now, this could be true on an individual level. This could be true on an organizational level. So there is this current state or this current reality. And then there's this future or this desired state. And there should always be a gap, okay? We should never be settling for just the current reality, right? An organization can't. An organization will go out of business if that's what they do, okay? So the idea here is that there is this gap, and there should always be a gap, even if you're already very, very good, okay? And I like to say that that gap of, being very, very good, it might be very, very small, right? From where you are and where you might want to go next, because you're already very, very good. But I can tell you that the energy and the actions and the plans for filling that gap and what you do in that gap when you're already very, very good can be just as hard as if there's a huge gap between where you are now and where you want to go. So it's not necessarily about how good or great you are now, but where you want to go next. What's that desired future something? And the fact is that there is always going to be, and there always should be, this gap, okay? So if you're following me here on the subject of stalled, stopped, settling, stuck kind of thing, the idea here is that people and organizations get stuck in the current reality and maybe are only tiptoeing or dabbling in the actions and the things necessary to fill the gap. Okay? So they're stuck here, they're stalled here, they're settling for the current reality versus, making the whatever necessary actions or steps need to take to get to that future reality. So they're stuck and they're busy, right? So that's where the busyness comes in. They're busy just doing that. And, that's one of the main reasons why people get stuck or stalled there is they can't even imagine having the time, energy, or focus to spend on the future when the current state is just consuming, right? So I want you to follow me and keep following me on this idea that there is the gap. Your current state, the future state, individuals, organizations. I'll give you some examples too, okay? So even with, let's say, just your building. So your healthcare organization and its building, it's got its current state, okay? And is it always going to be and look like that? No, there's going to be a future state for that building, okay? There's going to be renovations. Maybe there's going to be a new building. There's going to be certain levels of maintenance and changes to that building, right? It is not always going to stay the same, okay? So the future is really designed by what are those plans for that future and what do you do to fill that gap? Now, I know that there's organizations, and I worked for one, where they just delayed doing anything to fill that gap, and in essence, their building became obsolete. So the only thing they could do was build a new one. They had no other options than to start over, right? So, businesses sometimes make that move. They get so busy just operating in that current building that they don't move on into making those plans for that next thing. Okay, so you got your current building, you got your future building, and then you're filling that gap. And what you do in that gap determines what that future reality is going to look like. And if you ignore doing anything in that gap, you might get yourself into some big trouble. The building might not be usable in the future. The organization may not be in business in the future. You name it, okay? So that's really important to, see where this gap is. And, if you look at your building right now, you probably see many different add-ons and buildings. I've worked in assessed hospitals where there's, 5 different aged buildings all connected together. And that's part of designing the future state and moving forward. There might be a gap. Let's talk about sports. I'm a big hockey fan and sports fan. So when I think about a gap of the current reality of an individual athlete or a team, okay, and they want to get to a future state that isn't probably average or mediocrity, winning 50% of our games, having the losing season. That's not what they're striving for, I'm sure, right? Making the team, whatever it is, okay? So there's a gap here between their current level of skill and ability and mindset as an individual athlete or a team and this current desire, that future desire for something, and there's a gap, okay? So they have to fill that gap, and whatever they do in that gap is going to move them to or not to that future state. If they get stuck in that current reality, even if they're already very good, right? And they just stay in their current reality and they just dabble in maybe, continuing to get better, incrementally, small steps, etc. Guess what? What is their competition doing, right? What are the athletes that are trying out for the same team? What are the teams that they're competing against doing to fill that gap? And if they're doing more, guess who's going to win? Okay? I was listening to a podcast this morning about an author and his book. I can't remember the exact name of it, but I think the subtitle was something about champions aren't made by accident. Okay? Champions aren't made by accident. It's what they do in the gap. It's that vision they have and what they do in the gap to go there. You can think about this with your health, okay? Your current level of health, no matter what it is, it can already be really darn good, right? Maybe it's not so good, but there's this goal or this vision or this ideal of optimal health, right? And we strive for it and we want it, but if we stay stuck, if we stay, settled for our current state of health, that's where we're gonna be. And so if we keep doing what we're always doing, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. We've heard that so many times before, but that's an example of being stuck, settling, okay? So there's this gap to be filled. So like I said, whatever the current situation is, you can consider that there is a better future state, okay? And what you do in the gap is what differentiates those that are great to those that maybe aren't so great. So consider this, that concept I just mentioned to you. Champions are not made by accident. Also, great organizations don't happen by chance. Optimal health is not just a given. And new buildings don't design and build themselves, right? They just don't. There's something, done to get unstuck, to move forward towards that future state. So let me take a pause here. So you have to think about, what do you credit, those great organizations, those great teams for? What is it that makes them different, right? So the idea about what differentiates maybe average or good organizations or teams or whatever from the great ones is they know how to act in this gap, okay? So they plan and they execute very well on, what are the strategies, what are the plans, what is it we need to do to move forward, okay? So this gets into barrier number 1. There's actually 2 categories of barriers, I would say, that causes organizations or individuals to get stuck and not move forward and to not make, big leaps into that gap and have action to move forward is 1, lack of skill set, number 2, lack of mindset. Okay, so there is just this natural buildup of resistance or, to going into the gap, right? And you can say that that resistance or those barriers to going into the gap are usually we lack the skill set to do it or we lack the mindset to do it, but usually it is both, okay? So, and actually the mindset piece is usually the bigger piece, okay? To reasons why organizations are stuck, whether it's an individual or an organization. So an individual mindset, you can work on that yourself. With organizations, when we're talking about mindset, we're talking about the collective mindset of the organization, all the people in it, all its history, all its baggage. That is really about culture, okay? And so that is actually one of the biggest reasons that organizations don't take that leap to moving forward is it's gonna take a big shift in mindset to go from where you are now to where you want to be, okay? And there's strategies and plans for doing that, and we're going to explore that in these next 3 lives. Is this cultural or mindset barrier to, getting unstuck and moving forward? But I want to today focus on that first, resistance factor, which is we don't have the skill set, we don't have the knowledge, we don't have the experience to go from being where we are now to being here. If we did, we'd probably already be there, okay? So this idea that there's a knowledge gap or skill gap, so it's about skill set. And I will tell you, for instance, that example about, your current building and getting to a future building, guess what? You're not going to go it alone. You're not going to have all the skill set, mindset in your current building, in your current mind and skill set to do that alone, right? So when we're talking about big leaps from a current state here to a big state here, when we're talking about those big leaps, going from average to great or going from already great to staying great and inching out those incremental last minutes, like championship teams that want to repeat and three-peat, okay? So the action plan to doing that requires a skill set and maybe a combination of many skill sets, not just one. If you want that new building, you need a master facility plan, you need architects, you need contractors, you need builders, and guess what? You likely do not have them in your current employ. It's true, you just don't. So what do? You fill the gap by finding who can help you, right? And have them co-create it with you. You would never do it alone. You would never try to close that gap alone. Championship teams, right? Or star athletes, they did not go it alone. They did not have everything in their wheelhouse to do it alone. They had coaches, they had trainers, they had, sports psychologists, they had meditation instructors, you name it. They did not fill that gap alone. Same thing with your health and getting to optimal health. You're not likely going to fill that gap alone. I was listening to another podcast last week. You're going to think that's all I do, but I was traveling to Chicago and back, and there's 8 hours car ride, and boy, you can learn a lot in 8 hours if you listen to podcasts, and the trip goes by quickly. But I was listening to this other podcast from an author on a book. What's the name of it? I want to do it right here. Oh, it's called Cracking Complexity. Okay, so the idea here is these future states that we're talking about are complex situations. These are not simple, easy, future state kind of changes. These are complex things. And the idea that we have the skill set, knowledge, and the strategies in our own wheelhouse to make it happen is just, a fantasy. It's an illusion. It's a trap because it is just not going to happen. You have to reel in. You have to commit to who can help you, who has the knowledge, who has the skill set, who can help me fill this gap, okay? So that's what it takes. So not knowing how is certainly that skill set, knowledge, whatever, not knowing how is certainly one of the major traps that causes organizations to just get stuck and settle and really not move forward. So they get stalled because they've tapped out their energy, they've tapped out their expertise, they've tapped out their knowledge, and etc., and they just can't go forward. So when I was thinking about this too is, what do you need to know? For instance, when I talked about an organization that might be getting average results right now and they want to get top ranking award-winning results, what is part of the know-how that they need to find out, and discover? One of it's how to calm down that current reality, or whirlwind like we call it, and calm down those competing priorities so that you can spend time in the gap, planning, executing on those strategies that lead you to that future state, okay? So getting unstuck means having the know-how to calm down that current state, get it into optional functioning, make sure that it's managed day to day by, very, very well, so that time, energy can be focused. So that's a big know-how. Many leaders, many organizations don't know how to figure that out, how to calm down that current reality and at the same time work on the future, okay? So there's big know-how, skill set, knowledge needed there, and many individual leaders, many organizations don't have it. I was one of those people. I will tell you that I did all those things to go up the ranks in my leadership career and to, make a bigger impact in my leadership roles. I got my master's degree. I got board certified in healthcare administration, became a fellow in the American College. I am a lifelong learner. I am listening to podcasts. I am reading books. You guys know that this is, my thirst for knowledge. I'm always after it. But guess what? I can tell you that what I learned in my master's degree, what I learned in my board certification did not prepare me with a framework, with a strategy to calm down the whirlwind, tame down those competing priorities, and give time towards those future strategies and spend time filling that gap, taking the right actions necessary, having the right plans, having the right strategies, taking the right actions to fill that gap. I did not learn it there, okay? So many organizations, many leaders, they don't know it, right? They don't know it, okay? So that's why you have to tap into people outside of your organization that knows it to be able to move forward and fill that knowledge gap, or that I don't know how gap. So the other thing is, just not having a great strategy or plan. And I will tell you that many organizations get stuck in planning, okay? So maybe that's about the only time and energy they can get to, filling the gap, is trying to create a plan for it. Admittedly, the organization I worked for, where we did the big first transformation of a healthcare organization, and I was a leader there, we spent 2 years planning, and then 3 years executing on those plans, study, adjust, replanning. So 5 years really in the planning phase. So we can get stuck there. And in fact, me as an avid reader, lifelong learner, strategist, whatever, I can easily go down that rabbit hole and, act really busy on acting on the future by getting stuck in planning, okay? So that's where it's great to bring in experts from the outside that actually already basically have the plan. There might be some tweaks to it, right? But they basically already have the plan or know quickly how to get a plan in place, etc. So you can overcome the I don't know how by finding out who knows how and tapping into their wisdom, their expertise, their experience, complementing it to your team to create that future state. So you really can't go it alone. Whether you want a new building, whether you want a new culture and top ranking organization, whether you want optimal health, whether you want to be an award-winning organization or top ranking, team or athlete, you cannot go it alone, right? And it doesn't just happen. So that real next step then, if, filling that gap is filling that gap of we don't know how, who does, let's commit to it, is, that next step is committing to those who do know how. So committing with that, that coach, committing to that architect, committing to that planner, that strategist, that's the next step. Because if you don't have it internally right now, and you need to fill that gap and you need to find it, once you find it, you need to commit to it. And actually, That's where we get into mindset. And that's why people get stuck. That's why organizations get stuck. They might see it clearly, I don't know how. They might see it clearly that these people know how, right? And they might see that I could commit to them and I could bring that in, that talent, that expertise in, and together we could make it happen. But then there's this stalled, moment where there is that lack of commitment to move forward because of mindset. Okay, these traps that, okay, I know what's wrong here. I know we're lacking this. I see it's right here and I can go get it, but then you don't. And you stay stuck and you stay stalled, okay? So that's gonna be the focus of these next 3 live events is, what are those things that paralyze us, that make us stuck? So that even though when the obvious answers might be right around us and we see the obvious answer of the people that know how, we don't go for it even still, okay? And that's a mindset issue. And there's all sorts of things that we're gonna cover, 3 main categories of them that actually hold people back from accessing those resources that can take them to that future state that's better than their current reality. So, all right, so you've certainly heard kind of the setup for this whole 4 live events here in June that I'm gonna provide. This idea of you're here and you wanna go here and there's this gap in between and there's resistance. And I'm gonna end with a quote on that. This is from a book called Do the Work. Now this is a really quick read. It's a book that's probably a 20-30 minute read, maybe a little bit longer if you're a slow reader. I've read it a few times, but last time I read it, I pulled out this quote that says, any act that rejects immediate gratification in favor of long-term growth, health, or integrity will elicit resistance, okay? So that resistance is about mindset, and that's what we're going to talk about in these next 3 lives is what's causing that resistance. Even when the answers might be close to us, we might see that there's a plan right out there, there's people out there that could help us, yet we resist moving forward. We stay stuck or we settle with our current reality.